Ethnic studies is transformative. Ethnic studies is empowering. Ethnic studies can change the lives of young people. 1,000 of our 1.7 million high school students in California don't have access to an ethnic studies course. 76% of our population within California's public school system are students of color. This number will continue to grow. So why can't we, students of color, learn about our history? When hearing about California, people often tend to focus on the San Francisco Bay Area and the Southern California scene. I have sat and watched other cities get exposure and receive ethnic studies in their curriculums, and I would always wonder, when will it be our turn? My grandmother immigrated straight to Southside Stockton, straight to the Central Valley to work the fields. And this isn't just my narrative, but this is the majority of the narratives for the people of color in the Central Valley. We put food on the tables of America, but yet there are disparities and injustices when it comes to feeding our own children. There are struggles in feeding our children food. There are struggles in feeding our children proper education of our stories, and there is struggles in feeding our children justice. Because we are the same people who have been buried and trapped in a system that does not cater to us. But even when they tried to bury us, they never realized they actually planted us in the soils of the Central Valley. The Central Valley is one of the poorest and most overshadowed areas in California. Proper education is the key to healing decades of trauma and marginalization. Ethnic studies is the outlet we need to tell our stories to the world. And I would like to celebrate the bill AB 311 that would make ethnic studies classes mandatory in high schools of all California. And this would be another step toward justice for our people. We've let too many generations slide of inequity. And quoted from the Dolores Huerta of Stockton, California, the time of our liberation has been ripe for far too long. Our time for the Central Valley is now. For our ancestors, for our communities, for our people. This is our story, ethnic studies.
And as a freshman at Edison, I had a GPA of 1.38. I wasn't really connected with school. I wasn't connected with my city. I was kind of in that little box that like, I'm just trying to get out of Stockton and not really pay attention to like the people around me. And then through ethnic studies, the end of my junior year, I finished with a 3.8 GPA. Ethnic studies has showed me my history and a lot of my peers' histories, and learning that really changed my motives. Like now, like I'm really connected with the city. I always help around after school, and just because of ethnic studies, I've found a way, and it really changed my school career around for the better.
Ethnic studies to me is a catalyst for self-growth and like learning about my identity, because growing up in the Philippines, they wouldn't really talk about history, like Filipino history, and then here it's kind of ironic how I'm learning that here now that I'm in the US. So I think that it should be advantages and applied to every high school. It empowers us to pursue that higher education, and then also like learning more about our identity.
Before high school, my parents never educated me on why they came to America or why they immigrated. So I feel like ethnic studies helped me find why my ancestors came here and for what reasons. And also I feel like ethnic studies is important because I feel like all marginalized communities, like the community I'm from, need the representation, because a lot of people from my school, they don't have good test scores, and that's all they see. They don't really have a drive for higher education, and I feel like if they receive representation from ethnic studies, they'll find why higher education is so important.
So for me, ethnic studies is very important to me because not only does it explore ethnicity and race, it also goes like into the phenomenon of like sexuality, gender, and the histories of the minorities minority group that are often misrepresented in our day-to-day history textbooks, and that has helped me to embrace and like want to explore more like of the diversity within my own community. And I feel like that I would want that same like education to be like available to everyone in Stockton Unified School District.
So I was always really curious about my family history and where my parents had come from and why they had immigrated and why they had migrated to America. And I knew that like a war had happened somewhere, and I knew that like there was some political controversy happening back in Thailand and in all of Southeast Asia actually at the same time. But it wasn't until ethnic studies that I finally like learned about the Vietnam War and the Cambodian genocide and all these other things. Ethnic studies is the reason why I now understand that why communities like mine and why my parents are so uncomfortable speaking about this kind of thing is because they have to deal with the trauma of it and that they're just not comfortable. And so because of ethnic studies, I learned about this concept called intergenerational trauma. And now I understand like how significant it is for us as youth to move forward and try to spread these stories and hold conversations about them, because it's a history that shouldn't be forgotten.
Ethnic studies, I feel like that it's really important to me and my parents, because my parents were immigrants from the Philippines, so they didn't know what was happening in America. They didn't know what was happening with the United Farm Workers Movement in Delano. So I recently started taking ethnic studies class, and ever since I started taking it, I felt the thirst for knowledge of the backstory of the Filipino culture. And since then, I learned that the city that I was born in, Stockton, the city that my parents moved to because they thought that it would be better because it was close to the Bay Area, had once had the largest Filipino community outside of Manila or the Philippines itself. So learning that, I was really, it kind of just made me love my city a lot more than I already knew.
For me, learning about all the history of different cultural groups that are just left out and forgotten in like normal history textbooks basically gave me like a newfound passion and like drive for education, because after learning about so many of these different aspects that I probably would have never learned about through like normal schooling, just it inspired me to learn more about them and just start doing research and stuff on my own.
Ethnic studies was sort of like, it felt like it gave me like a purpose to go to school, because like I had never really enjoyed going to school. Like I'm smart, I got like all the materials, but I just never really enjoyed it. But then I started taking ethnic studies courses, and it was all this like information. It was sort of like a culture shock to me. And then suddenly like this history class that was just me learning about like what had happened in America in the past, I had seen like the flip side and learned like what happened to the other side, like the other side of the story. And it's sort of like I went from being like the student who just like sat in class and didn't really do anything to like now like I'll actively listen and I'll pay attention and I'll absorb the information. And then after school, since ethnic studies is an after school program, every Wednesday I go to a different high school when I finish and participate in their ethnic studies course. And then I'll go there and like I'll absorb all that knowledge, and it's just like, I don't know, it just sort of like really gave me a purpose. Like it made me feel like I belonged in school. Like education was never something that I really thought of as like, it was just something that had to happen because it had to happen. And then I started taking ethnic studies courses and I had a purpose, and it was like education is something that had to happen because we need it to happen.
For me, ethnic studies is really important because not only is it teaching, you know, the size and history of the conquered and not the conqueror, but it's also, you know, helping us as youth and as the next generation to bridge the gap between our communities and learn why we should strive to make them better.